Bridgewater Falls Event Center, Akron, Ohio. The kind of venue where the chandeliers alone cost more than what most men around here make in a month. Silk table runners. Imported orchids flown in from somewhere I can't pronounce. $94,000. That's what I paid. Every cent. So my daughter could have the wedding she dreamed about since she was 12 years old, drawing little dresses in the margins of her homework. I sat in the front row in my one good suit, a charcoal gray number I'd bought 3 years earlier for her nursing school graduation. I had a toast folded up in my jacket pocket. 3 weeks of rewrites on the back of a legal pad. But she told me there wouldn't be time for me to speak. So I sat there, and I smiled. I should not have smiled. Welcome back. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, every quiet man has a story the loud ones never bothered to learn. Subscribe so you never miss a story. My name is Gerald Hutchins. I'm 58 years old. Retired pipefitter out of Akron, Ohio. And if you saw me on the street, you wouldn't look twice. That's by design. I've got hands that look like a topographical map of every weld, every joint, every 16-hour shift I ever pulled in 40 years of working with steel and fire. My knuckles are permanently swollen. My left ring finger doesn't fully straighten anymore. Hasn't since a coupling joint caught it wrong back in 2004. I drive a 2009 Ford F-150 with 263,000 miles on it. The passenger seat has a coffee stain from 2017 that I've just accepted as part of the upholstery at this point. I shop at the same grocery store every Tuesday. I tip 30% at the diner on Route 8 because the waitress there, Donna, remembers that I take my coffee with 1 sugar and no cream, and that kind of loyalty deserves something. I raised my daughter Cassandra alone for 19 years. Her mother, my wife Ellen, died of a brain aneurysm the summer Cassandra turned 11. One morning Ellen was making French toast and singing along to the radio. By that afternoon, she was gone. No warning. No goodbye. Just a pop in her head like a light bulb burning out, and the whole world went dark. I was 39 years old, standing in a hospital hallway, holding a bag of Ellen's clothes in one hand and a permission slip for Cassie's 5th grade field trip in the other. That's the moment fatherhood stopped being something I shared and became something I carried alone. I worked double shifts at the plant, sometimes back to back to back. There were nights I'd come home at 2 in the morning smelling like copper flux and diesel, and I'd sit at the kitchen table eating cold cereal because I'd given Cassie the last of the real dinner before I left. Skipped meals more times than I can count. Not because I was trying to be noble, because there was 1 pork chop and she was growing and I wasn't, so the math was simple. I put her through private nursing school. Not the community college program, though there's nothing wrong with that, but a 4-year private program because I wanted her to have options I never had. I wanted her to walk into rooms where people took her seriously. I wanted her name on a degree that opened doors instead of just confirming she'd survived. That cost me. It cost me vacations, a new truck, a retirement that started on time, and more evenings alone than any man should have to count. But I didn't keep a ledger. That's not what fathers do. Fathers just keep showing up. And I did. Every single day. For 19 years. Until last Saturday. I should tell you about the months leading up to the wedding because the signs were there. I just wasn't reading them. Cassandra got engaged 14 months ago to a young man named Trevor Whitmore. Trevor works in medical device sales, the kind of job where you wear slim-fit suits and talk about verticals and market penetration, in a voice that sounds like it was calibrated in a boardroom. He's not a bad kid. I want to be clear about that. He shook my hand when he asked for my blessing, and his grip was firm, and he looked me in the eye. I gave him credit for that. But something shifted once the engagement happened. Cassandra started pulling away. Slowly. The way tide goes out, you don't notice it until your feet are dry. First, it was the guest list. She sent me a draft, and I noticed my side was thin. My buddies from the pipefitters union. Guys who'd watched her grow up, who'd brought casseroles to the house after Ellen died, who'd come to her softball games. They weren't on it. I asked about it. She said, "Dad, it's not that kind of wedding." I didn't know it yet, but that sentence was the first crack in something I thought was solid. Then it was the planning meetings. She started holding them at the Whitmore house, Trevor's parents' place, A 6-bedroom colonial in Bath Township with a circular driveway and a fountain that I'm pretty sure was imported from Italy. I was invited to exactly one of those meetings. I showed up with a check for $32,000, the first installment toward the venue deposit and catering. Cassandra's future mother-in-law, Patricia Whitmore, looked at the check, looked at me and said, "How generous." Not "thank you." Not "that's wonderful." How generous. Like she was surprised the pipefitter's money was real. That should have told me everything. The second sign came 8 weeks before the wedding. Cassandra called me to say there wouldn't be time for me to give a toast. She said the schedule was tight, the band had a hard start time, and the Whitmores had already lined up 3 speakers. "You understand, right, Dad?" she said. I told her I understood. I didn't tell her I'd already been working on that toast for 2 weeks. I didn't tell her I'd written and rewritten it on the back of a legal pad at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to help her with long division. I just said, "Whatever you need, sweetheart." I filed it away. I kept the toast in my jacket pocket anyway, just in case. The third sign was the rehearsal dinner. I wasn't seated with Cassandra. I wasn't seated with the wedding party at all. I was at a table near the kitchen entrance with my sister Marlene and 2 of Trevor's distant cousins who spent the entire evening talking about cryptocurrency. Marlene leaned over at one point and whispered, "Jerry, this isn't right." I patted her hand. "It's her day," I said. "Let her have it." Looking back, I understand now that I wasn't being patient. I was being erased. 1 table assignment at a time. But I kept showing up. Because that's what I do. I showed up the morning of the wedding with the final check, the last installment, bringing the total to $94,000. Every cent of that wedding. The flowers, the venue, the caterer, the band, the photographer, the videographer, the custom invitations on linen cardstock, the party favors that nobody would remember by Monday. I handed the check to the wedding coordinator, a woman named Angela who at least had the decency to say, "Thank you," like she meant it. Then I went and sat in the front row. Charcoal gray suit, legal pad toast in my pocket, hands folded, ready to watch my little girl get married. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to learn what $94,000 buys you when the person spending it has forgotten where it came from. The ceremony was beautiful. I'll give it that. The Bridgewater Falls Event Center looked like something out of a magazine. 300 white roses lining the aisle, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the falls, candlelight reflecting off every surface. 200 guests in their finest. I recognized maybe 40 of them. The rest were Trevor's world, his colleagues, his parents' country club friends, people who smelled like money the way I used to smell like pipe grease. Cassandra walked down the aisle and she looked like her mother. That hit me in a place I didn't expect. Same jawline, same way she held her chin up. I had to press my tongue against the roof of my mouth to keep myself together. The vows were exchanged. The rings were placed. The officiant pronounced them married. And the room erupted in applause, and I clapped harder than anyone because that's my girl and I didn't care what table they put me at. That was my girl up there. Then came the reception. After dinner, a 4-course meal that I later found out cost $68 a plate. The toasts began. Trevor's best man spoke. Funny, polished. Trevor's father, Richard Whitmore, spoke next. He talked about legacy and the Whitmore name and how Trevor was carrying the family tradition forward. He did not mention Cassandra's family. He did not mention me. He did not mention Ellen. And then Cassandra stood up. She took the microphone with a confidence I didn't recognize. She thanked the Whitmores. She thanked her bridesmaids. She thanked the wedding planner by name. She talked about her career in nursing, about her ambition, about refusing to settle for a small life. She used that phrase, a small life, and I felt something tighten in my chest because I knew where it was aimed. Then she paused. She looked directly at me. Front row, charcoal gray suit, hands on my knees, and 200 guests followed her gaze until every eye in that gilded ballroom was on the retired pipe fitter from Akron sitting in his one good suit. "I love my dad," she said. And for 1 second, 1 breath, I thought she was going to say something kind. But honestly, he was more of a cautionary tale than a role model. She paused for the laugh. And it came. A man who smelled like pipe grease his whole life and called that living. 200 guests laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not the kind you give when someone's joke doesn't land but you want to be nice. No, this was the kind of laugh that fills a room and empties a man at the same time. It rolled across the tables like a wave, and I felt it hit me in the sternum. I felt it in my molars. I felt it in the 19 years of cold cereal and double shifts and permission slip signed at 2 in the morning. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I sat there in my one good suit, and I kept my face still, and I breathed through my nose the way I learned to breathe when Ellen died and the world expected me to fall apart and I refused. I looked over at my sister Marlene, the one person in that hall who knew every sacrifice, who had watched me go without so Cassandra wouldn't have to, who had driven 2 hours to sit in this room and witness her niece's happiness. Marlene looked down at her champagne flute and said nothing. That silence was worse than the laughter. Marlene's silence was a mirror held up to my own. Two people who loved Cassandra too much to correct her, even when she was wrong, even when she was cruel. The applause that followed Cassandra's toast was enthusiastic. Patricia Whitmore, Trevor's mother, leaned over to me during the transition and put her hand on my forearm. I thought for a moment she was going to say something kind. "Gerald," she said, her voice low and polished, "it might be best if you kept a low profile during the reception. The family has an image to maintain. You'd probably be more comfortable leaving before the dinner service wraps up." I looked at her hand on my arm. Manicured nails. A diamond tennis bracelet that cost more than my truck. I nodded. I said nothing. What nobody in that gilded banquet hall knew. Not Cassandra, not Patricia, not Richard Whitmore, not a single one of the 200 guests who had just laughed at the pipe grease punchline, was that the man they had dismissed as a cautionary tale had quietly built a pipeline inspection company from the ground up. A company born out of 30 years of field knowledge and one evening course in business management at the community college. A company I grew from a one-man operation in my garage to a fleet of 14 trucks and 41 employees. And 7 years ago, I sold that company for just over $2.3 million. I never told Cassandra. Not because I was hiding it. Because it didn't matter. Money wasn't the point. The point was showing up. The point was making sure she never went without. And there was a manila envelope sitting in the glove compartment of my 2009 Ford F-150 in the parking lot outside that building. Inside it was a document. One I'd had my attorney, Ray Callahan, draw up 6 weeks earlier. A trust. A wedding gift. The kind of gift that would have changed Cassandra and Trevor's life in ways they couldn't have imagined. I was still deciding what to do with it. Then the groom's boss stood up. His name was Martin Kessler. I didn't know him. I'd never met him. He was Trevor's regional director at MedTech Solutions. A tall man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of calm authority that comes from decades of running rooms full of people who think they're the smartest person in it. Martin Kessler stood from his table, table 3 near the front, and walked toward the stage with a deliberateness that made people stop talking. He didn't rush. He didn't wave. He simply walked up to where Cassandra was still standing with the microphone, and he reached out his hand. Cassandra looked confused. She glanced at Trevor. Trevor looked at his boss and gave a small, uncertain nod. Cassandra handed over the microphone. The room went quiet. Not the quiet of anticipation. The quiet of something shifting that nobody could name yet. Martin Kessler held the microphone and looked out over the 200 guests. He didn't smile. He didn't open with a joke. He just stood there for a moment, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt all evening. I felt seen, because Martin Kessler looked directly at me, and I realized, with a clarity that made my hands go still, that I knew that look. It was recognition. But I didn't know him. I was certain of it. I'd never seen his face before. And then he spoke, and everything changed. But before I tell you what he said, before I tell you what happened when the room stopped laughing and started listening, I need to tell you what happened inside me in the 30 seconds before he opened his mouth. Because in those 30 seconds, while Martin Kessler stood at the front of that room holding a microphone that my daughter had just used to turn me into a punchline, I made a decision. I reached into my jacket pocket. Not for the toast. For my phone. I opened my contacts. I scrolled to Ray Callahan, my attorney. The man who had drawn up the trust document sitting in my truck. The document that would have gifted Cassandra and Trevor a fully funded trust worth $420,000. Enough for a house down payment, student loan payoffs, and a start that most young couples would kill for. I typed 3 words in a text message. I didn't send it yet. I just typed it and let my thumb hover over the screen. Pull the trust. I set the phone face down on my knee, and I looked up at Martin Kessler. And I listened. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. Martin Kessler cleared his throat. The sound system carried it across the room, and you could hear a pin drop in that banquet hall. 200 guests. Silent. Watching a man they mostly didn't know hold a microphone like he'd been born with one in his hand. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, he began. His voice was measured, unhurried, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume to carry weight. But I just heard something from this stage that I can't let stand without a response. He paused. Cassandra, still standing near the head table, crossed her arms. Trevor shifted in his seat. My name is Martin Kessler. Most of you know me as Trevor's boss, regional director at MedTech Solutions. I've been in the pipeline and infrastructure industry for 37 years before I transitioned to medical devices. He let that land. Pipeline and infrastructure. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I said pipeline and infrastructure, Martin continued, because I want to make sure the man sitting right there in the front row, the one some of you just laughed at, understands that I know exactly who he is. He pointed at me, not aggressively, the way you point at someone you respect. Gerald Hutchins, he said. My name filled the room like a bell. I know that name, Martin continued, because 15 years ago, I was a project manager on the Cuyahoga County gas line expansion, biggest infrastructure job in Northeast Ohio that decade. And there was one subcontractor, who consistently delivered ahead of schedule, under budget, and with 0 safety incidents. Every single inspection passed on the first review. Every weld, every joint, every coupling. Do you know how rare that is in this industry? He looked at the room. Nobody answered. That subcontractor was a company called Hutchins Pipeline Inspection, run by one man and whatever crew he could pull together. A pipe fitter from Akron who taught himself the inspection codes, got his certifications on weekends, and built something out of nothing while raising a daughter on his own. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice settling in water glasses. I tried to hire Gerald 3 times, Martin said. 3 times. He turned me down every time because, and this is a direct quote, I've got a kid who needs me home by 6. Something moved through the room. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. The kind of shift you can't see but you can sense, like the barometric pressure dropping before a storm. Martin Kessler took 2 steps forward, closer to the guests. 7 years ago, Gerald Hutchins sold Hutchins Pipeline Inspection. I know this because my former firm was one of the companies that bid on acquiring it. We were outbid. The final sale price, and this is a matter of public record in the business filings, was just north of $2.3 million. $2.3 million. The words landed on that room like a freight train. I watched Cassandra's face. I watched it go from confusion to disbelief to something I can only describe as the expression of a person realizing they've been standing on a trapdoor. Patricia Whitmore's hand, the one that had been on my arm telling me to leave, was now covering her own mouth. Richard Whitmore set down his wine glass very carefully, as if it might shatter. So when I hear someone on this stage, Martin continued, and now there was an edge to his voice, describe this man. This man who built a company with his hands, who raised a daughter alone, who turned down career opportunities so he could be home for dinner. When I hear someone call him a cautionary tale, he paused, and the pause was devastating. I need every person in this room to understand that the man you just laughed at could buy and sell most of the people at these tables. And he never said a word about it. Not because he's ashamed, but because he's the kind of man who measures his worth by what he gives, not by what he has. Martin Kessler looked at me. Gerald, he said, I've wanted to meet you for years. It's an honor. The room didn't applaud. Not yet. The room was too stunned for applause. What happened instead was something worse for the people who had laughed. It was silence. The kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. The kind that makes you replay what you just did and realize you can't take it back. I stood up. Not dramatically. Not to make a point. I stood the way I always stand. Slowly, because my knees aren't what they used to be, and carefully, because a pipefitter learns to move with intention. I buttoned my suit jacket. My one good suit. Charcoal gray. And I looked at my daughter. Cassandra's eyes were wet. Her lips were parted. She looked like the 11-year-old girl who stood in a hospital hallway 19 years ago, suddenly understanding that the world was not what she thought it was. I could have said 100 things. I could have pulled out the toast from my pocket and read every word. I could have talked about the double shifts, the skipped meals, the $94,000 I handed over without asking for a single thank you. I could have told her about the manila envelope in my truck, about the trust fund I had built for her future, about the $420,000 that was supposed to be my way of saying, I gave you everything I had and I'd do it again. But I didn't say any of that. I looked at Cassandra calmly, and I spoke clearly, and I said, I am not a cautionary tale. I am the man who showed up, every day, for 19 years, in pipe grease and steel-toed boots. And I would do it all again, not because you earned it, but because that's what love does. It shows up even when it's not recognized. I reached into my pocket, not for the toast, for my phone. I looked down at the text I had typed to Ray Callahan. 3 words, pull the trust. And in front of 200 silent guests, I pressed send. Then I walked to Martin Kessler, shook his hand, and said, thank you. That took guts. He shook back and said, that took nothing compared to what you've done. I turned and walked up the center aisle, past the silk table runners and the imported orchids and the 300 white roses that my money had paid for. I walked past Marlene, who was crying now. I touched her shoulder as I passed. She grabbed my hand and squeezed, and that single squeeze said more than anything anyone had said all night. I walked out of the Bridgewater Falls Event Center and into the parking lot. I climbed into my 2009 Ford F-150. I opened the glove compartment, took out the manila envelope, and set it on the passenger seat. I sat there for a long time. Then I started the engine and drove home. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps when you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. 6 weeks later, I'm sitting on the back porch of a 3-bedroom cabin I bought on Atwood Lake, about an hour south of Akron. Nothing extravagant. Knotty pine walls. A stone fireplace I rebuilt myself because the original mason did a sloppy job on the flue and it bothered me. There's a dock out back with a 14-foot fishing boat that I take out most mornings before the sun fully clears the tree line. I wake up at 5:30, not because I have to, because 40 years of early shifts rewired something in me that sleep can't fix. I make coffee, 1 sugar, no cream, and I sit on the porch and listen to the loons. That's it. That's the whole morning routine. And it's the most peaceful thing I've ever known. The money from the company sale is mostly invested. I live off the interest and a modest pension from the pipefitters union. I don't need much. I never did. The truck is the same, 2009 F-150, though I finally got the passenger seat reupholstered. Donna from the diner on Route 8 said it was about time. Marlene drives down every other Sunday. She brings her potato salad and a bottle of something red, and we sit by the lake and talk about Ellen, about the old neighborhood, about nothing in particular. She was the first person I called after the wedding. She picked up on the first ring and said, Jerry, I'm so sorry I didn't say anything. I told her there was nothing to be sorry for. She was in an impossible spot, but I could hear her crying through the phone, and I knew she'd been carrying that guilt since the moment she looked down at her champagne flute instead of standing up. You were there, I told her. That was enough, and I meant it. Marlene has been there for every chapter of my life that mattered. One silent moment in a banquet hall doesn't erase 30 years of showing up. Martin Kessler and I have had lunch twice. Once in Akron, once in Cleveland. He told me that after the wedding, he pulled Trevor aside and told him, in no uncertain terms, that a man who allows his wife to humiliate her father in public is a man who will eventually allow worse. He said Trevor looked shaken. I believe it. Martin is the kind of man who doesn't raise his voice because he doesn't need to. As for Cassandra, she called me 11 days after the wedding. I let it go to voicemail. She called again the next day. And the next. I listened to the first message. It started with, "Dad, I think we need to talk about what happened. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. I think we need to talk about what happened." As though the humiliation was a weather event that occurred rather than a choice she made with a microphone in her hand. I didn't call back. She sent a letter 3 months later. Handwritten. For pages. It was better than the voicemail. She acknowledged what she said. She talked about how the Whitmore's lifestyle had gotten into her head. How she'd been trying so hard to fit into their world that she'd convinced herself she needed to distance from mine. She said she was ashamed. She said she understood if I needed time. I read that letter twice. I folded it and put it in the same drawer where I keep Ellen's obituary and Cassie's first-grade report card. I haven't responded. Not because I don't love her. I do. I love her the way the earth loves rain. Completely, unconditionally, and without any say in the matter. But love and access are two different things. And right now, I need her to understand that a man she called a cautionary tale is a man who gets to decide when, and if, the door opens again. I heard through Marlene that things have been difficult. The Whitmores, it turns out, are not as financially solid as their 6-bedroom colonial suggests. Richard Whitmore's consulting firm lost 2 major clients. Patricia had to sell the Italian fountain. Trevor's job is fine. Martin Kessler made sure of that because Martin is fair. But the lifestyle Cassandra married into is quieter now. Smaller. The kind of life she once mocked. The trust one pulled, the $420,000. I redirected it. Half went into a scholarship fund at the pipefitters local for apprentices who are raising kids on their own. The other half went into an education trust for Marlene's grandchildren. Marlene cried when I told her. "Jerry, that's too much," she said. I told her it was exactly the right amount. The manila envelope is still in my desk drawer. Empty now. But I keep it as a reminder that generosity and dignity are not the same thing, and that a gift given to someone who doesn't respect the giver is not a gift at all. It's a transaction. And I'm done with transactions. People ask me sometimes, Marlene asks, Martin has asked, whether I regret it, whether I wish I'd told Cassandra about the money years ago, whether things would have been different if she'd known her father wasn't just a pipe fitter, but a man who had built something and sold it, and put the proceeds away like a quiet savings account against a rainy day. And the answer is no. Because here's what I've learned, and I want you to hear this clearly. If the only reason someone respects you is because of what's in your bank account, then they never respected you at all. They respected the number. And numbers change. Respect shouldn't. I think about the 2 versions of my life, and the contrast tells me everything I need to know. There's the old version, the one Cassandra described from that stage. A man who smelled like pipe grease. A man who drove an old truck. A man who wore the same suit to every occasion because he only owned one. A man who ate cold cereal at 2 in the morning so his daughter could have the last pork chop. A cautionary tale. And then there's this version. The one I'm living now. A man on a lake. A man with a fishing boat and a rebuilt fireplace and a sister who brings potato salad every other Sunday. A man whose name is on a scholarship that will help young fathers get the same start he once had. A man who is at peace, not because everything worked out, but because he knows who he is and he knew it all along. The difference between those 2 versions? Nothing. I am the same man. I was the same man in the pipe grease. I was the same man in the banquet hall. I'm the same man on this porch. The only thing that changed is who was paying attention. Cassandra saw a cautionary tale because she was looking at the surface. The hands. The truck. The suit. She forgot to look at what those hands built. She forgot to ask where that truck had been. She forgot that the man in that suit had written her a toast. 3 weeks of rewrites on the back of a legal pad, and carried it in his pocket even after she told him there wouldn't be time. I still have that toast. It's in the drawer with her letter and Ellen's obituary. Maybe one day I'll read it to her. Maybe I won't. That's not up to me anymore. That's up to the woman she decides to become. But I'll tell you this, and I mean this for anyone listening who has ever been made small by someone they loved. You are not what they call you. You are not the joke they made at your expense. You are not the table they sat you at, or the microphone they took from you, or the profile they told you to keep low. You are every early morning, every double shift, every cold meal, every sacrifice made without applause. You are the man who showed up. And showing up in pipe grease, in steel-toed boots, in your one good suit, is not a cautionary tale. It's the whole story. There's a coffee mug on the railing beside me. One sugar. No cream. Steam rising into the lake air. The loons are calling again. That long, lonely sound they make at dawn that somehow doesn't feel lonely at all. I take a sip. The coffee is still warm. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.